Any tips for running the town of Vallaki in Curse of Strahd? It has so many things going on. Where do you put your characters first? Holy crap, you have no idea, dude. Well, actually you do. You're asking the question. Dude, the town of Vallaki is a hot, sloppy mess. Now, really quick before we jump in, I want to let you know that I am publishing a monthly PDF out to my patrons that includes tons of Dungeon Master resources for them to use in their games. These are things that should reduce the prep time for your games and improve the quality of your games. So we're going to be putting things in here like NPCs, traps, villains with stat blocks for them, puzzles, really cool puzzles fleshed out in detail, magic items, encounters, random tables, and adventure ideas. And every monthly PDF contains 2 entire D&D 5th edition adventures for you with maps designed for use on virtual tabletops. And I'm teaming up with the Mad Cartographer as well for some of these maps. These are crazy high quality, awesome maps, by the way, folks, not just some piece of crap that I threw together in some program in 2 minutes. The PDF as a whole is a high quality. I've been showing you pictures on the screen of this PDF. It is not just some piece of crap I threw together in like 2 seconds. There's some really good stuff. Our last PDF was over 30 pages of resources for Dungeon Masters. So if this sounds like something that might be useful for you in your games, check out the link to my Patreon page down below. Here's the thing. There's a lot of cool stuff in Vallaki, in Curse of Strahd, lots of cool stuff going on, and that town and the adventure or adventures that you run in it, because there's lots of plot hooks potentially in there, can be really fun and really cool. But the town of Vallaki in Curse of Strahd was really designed to be, it's a very sandboxy town, in the sense that there's lots of different things going on, and the biggest thing with Vallaki is that the module doesn't really give you any guidance whatsoever on how to actually run that town. Like, the module gives you a layout of the town. It explains all these different things. It explains how the mayor's, has these festivals. There's, people are arrested for, what do they call it? Unhappiness. Like divisive unhappiness, I forget, they have a term for it, but people get arrested for not being happy. And then you have like Lady Watcher, who's really wants to run the town and get rid of the mayor. Malicious unhappiness, thank you, yes. So there's lots of really cool things going on in Vallaki, but the module gives you practically zero guidance on what to actually do when you get there. You got the bones that are missing from St. Andrew's Church, but so there's this big mishmash of stuff. And the Dungeon Master really has to figure out, what the heck do I even do with this? So in my opinion, that part of the module has tons of potential, tons of cool stuff. And I ran it for my players recently, and I think it was really cool. We had lots of fun and stuff, but the people who wrote it kind of just gave you a plate of mishmashed stuff that doesn't have any guidance, doesn't have any real order to it. And that's up to the Dungeon Master to put that in order, to make it make sense, to give plot hooks to your players and stuff. And haven't answered your question yet. I'm getting there, which is an unfortunate way to write that part of the module. It's like so much potential, and yet they don't give the Dungeon Master a whole lot of guidance at all about how to run Vallaki. So that is the fault of people who wrote that, obviously. But the modules can never be perfect. There's always going to be something wrong with them, and there's always going to be some element to a module that you're going to have to flesh out and tweak on your own. And in Vallaki, that's very true too. So what I basically did is I examined the village of Vallaki, and I decided as a Dungeon Master which parts of it I thought were cool that I wanted to emphasize to my players, and I decided to run a sort of political mini game there, or not it's not a political campaign, political sort of adventure there. What I decided to do was to emphasize the fact that Lady Watcher is trying to supplant, what's the name of the mayor there? The burgomaster, I forget his name. They always have these weird names that I can never remember. But Lady Watcher is trying to supplant the current burgomaster. If anybody knows the name of the current burgomaster in Vallaki, maybe Ed, please throw it there so I can talk like I actually know what I'm talking about. Valakovich? Oh my gosh. We're gonna call him Burgomaster V. So Lady Watcher's trying to supplant Burgomaster B. And to do that, what I had done is I created this machination by which Lady Watcher is actually responsible for the stealing of the bones from St. Andrew's Church. So she essentially paid the coffin maker to get the one boy, the gravedigger boy, who then got the altar boy to get the priest, I forget his name, to tell him where the bones were. And then, you know, one thing led to another. The coffin maker ended up with the bones, gave them to Ernesto or something like that, Lady Watchter's spy guy, who then planted, I'm just telling you the details about how I fleshed this out and set things up to actually make it an adventure for my players. Then the spy took those bones and hid them up in the burgomaster's house. And then when this whole problem with the bones was revealed, Lady Watchter had her sons plant the idea with my players characters, that the that the bones was the problem, that the bones were missing and the town was in trouble. And the idea, what Lady Watchter really wanted, is she wanted to frame the burgomaster for the stealing of the bones, so that if horrible ill, such as vampires attacking or something, befell the town, the burgomaster would be blamed. Or if somebody, like an adventuring party, found the bones in the burgomaster's house, her hope was the adventuring party, with weapons and stuff, might end up wiping out the burgomaster, wipe out his, maybe, what's the name of the guy with the demon hand? I forget his name. The demon hand boy. Ed, who's the demon hand boy? The burgomaster's lackey. I forget his name. You gotta help me out, man. I'm not good with names, apparently. Isaac, thank you. So Lady Watchter wanted the adventurers to, like, either implicate the burgomaster and get him in trouble politically, or perhaps even ousted as a burgomaster, or just storm his compound and just wipe them all out, like murder, right? And so Lady Watchter was manipulating these events. And it was fairly successful too. My players were following along the entire way, except that right before they were kind of basically going to storm the burgomaster, they ended up going to Lady Watchter's house, found her bad stuff happening down in her basement, the cult that she was running, and then ended up, I forget exactly all the details, but they ended up doing certain things where there was a threat to Lady Watchter and she was afraid for her life, and she left the town and fled to her estate in the countryside. And then the players went into the burgomaster's house. Even after they got the bones first, they convinced Ernesto to get the bones for them. They turned the bones over to the priest and resolved that first. But then they went back to the burgomaster's house because there was a shoemaker that had been taken for malicious unhappiness from the church's congregation, and the priest had been asking them to get the shoemaker released. And so they went back and they'd heard about the burgomaster's son up in the attic being super crazy, and they didn't like Isaac, and they didn't like the whole idea where the burgomaster was putting people in the stockades and abusing them because of malicious unhappiness. So they really had a vendetta against the burgomaster anyway. So they went back to the burgomaster's house, for all intents and purposes, pretty much killed everybody there. They killed the burgomaster, they killed the son Isaac, or the son Victor, and then they later on took out Isaac and all this kind of stuff. So they wiped out the burgomaster. They ended up sending Lady Watchter running for the roads, and then there was this vacuum of leadership in Vallaki, and they ended up installing who was it, so there was a burgomaster in the town of Barovia, and he had a son and a daughter, and the son's name was it Bismarck, and the daughter's name is she's like one of the most important NPCs in the entire module. She's the girl that Strahd wants as his bride. Please, somebody give me her name. Irina, there we go, Irina. Okay, cool. So with this void of leadership in Vallaki, my players then went to Irina and Bismarck and were like, hey, you guys want to rule Vallaki? And so they installed Irina and Bismarck, I think his name was Bismarck, as the leaders of Vallaki. And that's how they cleaned everything up. But my point is, I told you kind of the whole story of how I set everything up. But my point is not to necessarily do it the way I did it. My point is that as a dungeon master, you kind of have to figure out how you want to present Vallaki to your friends. Now, I had no idea how my players would resolve everything. I presented the situation of the political strife, of Lady Watchter having to do with the bones and all this kind of stuff. I didn't know how my players were going to approach it, how they were going to resolve it, what would actually happen as a result. So I set the situation up, and then my players just played it through, and we saw how things shook out. And so I tell you that story because that's just one iteration. I could set up the exact same situation for a different group and it might turn out differently. Who knows? So I didn't manipulate the plot. I didn't guide them down a certain route. That would be railroading, right? But I set the situation up and I allowed things to unfold. And my point is that Dungeon Masters, when you're running Vallaki and Curse of Strahd, or any town that's set up like that, you have to do the same thing. You have to set up some plot hooks, establish plot hooks and things like that, set up the situation, present little plot hooks to your players. I had about 3 different plot hooks I presented to my players. I told them about the shoemaker that had been arrested for malicious unhappiness and was being held in the burgomaster's house. I told them that the St. Andrew's bones were missing. And then I was constantly painting the burgomaster as this really bad guy who was being a bad ruler to the people. And so I was planting all of these little things, and I was just counting on them following up on one of them and just seeing where things went. So I ran Vallaki like very much like a sandbox, where I prepared and established a bunch of different things, and then my players were free to approach any of them and do kind of whatever they wanted within the framework of Vallaki. Right? So it wasn't an undirected sandbox where I was like, hey guys, just do whatever you want. Whee! And then they wandered around trying to find something fun and interesting to do. It wasn't an undirected sandbox like that. Those probably are pretty sucky games in my opinion, but hey, that's just me. Instead, it was more of a directed sandbox in that here's a big sandbox, here are some plot hooks. What do you guys want to do? I gave them some interesting things for them to follow up on and do. And so that's how I ran Vallaki. And I thought it was really, really cool and lots of fun for my players. It was a whole lot more work preparing that part of the game than it was, say, preparing Death House, a simple location-based adventure. This is probably the way I ran Vallaki. Not only was it more of a sandbox, but it was also approaching more of an event-based adventure. It was still location-based because there were still location-based elements, but it was also a little bit more trending toward event-based as well. And because it was a sandbox and because it was event-based to a certain extent, that made it trend toward a lot more prep work and being a lot more difficult to run at the game table. But it was super fun. I thought it was fun. My players, who knows, hopefully they thought it was fun too. They're still my players. They haven't quit yet, so we'll just say they thought it was fun.